The email from my mother arrived on a Tuesday morning with the subject line, Family Foundation Gala, Revised Guest List. I opened it to find a spreadsheet with 340 names. Mine had been highlighted in red with a note in the margin, removed, doesn't meet event profile requirements. I called my older brother David. Did you see Mom's email about the gala? Yeah. Look, Riley, don't take it personally. This year's event is really high profile. We've got senators, ambassadors, Fortune 500 CEOs. Mom's trying to elevate the foundation's image. And I damaged that image? Pause. You work for a nonprofit. These people are going to be discussing international policy, corporate strategy, diplomatic relations. What would you contribute to those conversations? Mom doesn't want you sitting there uncomfortable while everyone else networks at a sophisticated level. At 30, I'd heard variations of this my entire adult life. David was a managing director at an investment bank. My younger sister Lauren was a corporate attorney specializing in international law. They were polished, impressive, exactly what our parents wanted when they established the Martin Family Foundation 10 years ago. I was Riley Martin, who worked for an NGO, a description my mother used with an apologetic tone that suggested I handed out pamphlets on street corners. What they didn't know was that I was the deputy director of the International Crisis Group, one of the most influential conflict prevention organizations in the world. At 27, I'd become the youngest person ever appointed to the position. I'd negotiated ceasefire agreements in 3 war zones, briefed the UN Security Council 17 times, and advised governments on everything from nuclear proliferation to humanitarian intervention. I made $195,000 annually, had published 2 books on conflict resolution that were required reading at Georgetown and Harvard, and held advisory positions with 4 different governments. The Secretary of State had my personal cell number. I lived modestly in a small apartment in D.C., drove a 10-year-old Toyota, and kept my professional life completely separate from my family. They'd made it clear that nonprofit work was noble but ultimately unsuccessful, something people did when they couldn't make it in the real world. I'd also been financially supporting my parents for 5 years. $7,000 monthly deposits they called foundation contributions, and never discussed. My father's tech consulting firm had failed years ago. My mother's art gallery had closed. The Martin Family Foundation, their pride and joy, ran almost entirely on my money and David's occasional donations. The gala is important for the foundation's visibility, David continued. We're trying to attract major donors. Having you there would send the wrong message about the caliber of people we associate with. What message would that be? That look, you're great at what you do. But these events require a certain polish, a certain sophistication. You show up in business casual to family dinners. You don't understand luxury brands or fine dining etiquette. These people will be wearing couture and discussing yacht clubs. You'd stand out, and not in a good way. I understand. Great. I'm glad you're being mature about this. Maybe we can grab coffee next month. He hung up. I stared at my phone, then opened my email to a message that had arrived that morning from the State Department Protocol Office. Ms. Martin, confirming your attendance at the state dinner honoring the French president on November 15th. The President and Secretary of State have specifically requested your presence at the head table. Please coordinate with our office regarding security clearance and seating arrangements. November 15th. The same night as my family's gala. I'd planned to decline the state dinner invitation. It felt wrong to overshadow my family's event, even if I wasn't invited. But being told I wasn't ready for sophisticated company had changed my perspective. I replied, confirmed. I'll be honored to attend. The weeks leading up to the gala were filled with my mother's social media posts. Photos of the venue, a historic mansion in Georgetown. Previews of the menu from a Michelin-starred chef. Humble brags about the incredible caliber of confirmed guests. She never mentioned that one of her children had been deliberately excluded. 3 days before the event, Lauren called. Mom wanted me to check in with you about the gala situation. There's no situation. I'm not invited. Right, but she wanted to make sure you understood it's nothing personal. The foundation is at a critical juncture. We're trying to establish ourselves among serious philanthropic organizations. This gala needs to demonstrate that we operate at the highest levels. And I don't operate at those levels. You work for a nonprofit, Riley. That's admirable, but it's not the same as working in finance or law or diplomacy. The people attending this gala are power players. They're not going to be impressed by someone who works in humanitarian aid. I said nothing. Mom also wanted me to mention that if anyone asks where you are, we're saying you're traveling for work. That sounds better than admitting we didn't think you were appropriate for the guest list. How considerate. Don't be like that. This is important for the family. The foundation reflects on all of us. Can't you just be supportive? I am being supportive. I'm staying away like you asked. After she hung up, I pulled out the dress I'd selected for the state dinner. A midnight blue gown from an Italian designer that had cost more than my monthly rent. The State Department Protocol Office had very specific requirements for formal state dinners. Nothing flashy, nothing trendy, nothing that would photograph poorly next to heads of state. The gown was perfect. Elegant, understated, exactly what someone seated at the president's table should wear. The night of November 15th arrived with unseasonably warm weather. I did my makeup carefully, styled my hair in a classic updo, and put on the diamond earrings I'd purchased with my first book advance. Simple, expensive, appropriate. My phone buzzed with texts from extended family members asking why I wasn't at the gala. I'd become the family embarrassment, the daughter too unsophisticated to attend her own family's event. At 6:30 p.m., a black SUV arrived at my apartment. State Department security. The driver verified my identity, checked my invitation and opened the door. Ms. Martin will have you at the White House in 20 minutes. The White House. My family was hosting their gala at a rented mansion, impressing people with a Michelin-starred chef. I was attending a state dinner with the President of the United States and the President of France. We arrived at the East Gate where security was extensive. Multiple checkpoints, credential verification, Secret Service everywhere. Other guests were arriving in similar black SUVs. Senators, cabinet members, ambassadors, business leaders who actually operated at the levels my family pretended to reach. Inside the White House was breathtaking. The Cross Hall was decorated with thousands of flowers. A military band played classical music. Waiters circulated with champagne. The guest list was maybe 200 people. Small for a state dinner, which made it even more exclusive. Secretary of State Catherine Morrison found me immediately. Riley, I'm so glad you could make it. The president specifically wanted you here tonight. Your work on the Middle East Peace Initiative has been invaluable. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm honored to be included. Honored? You're one of the most important people in this room. The French president read your book on conflict resolution. He's been asking to meet you for months. She introduced me to the French foreign minister, 2 senators, and the UN ambassador. Each conversation reinforced what my family had never understood. In these circles, I wasn't an embarrassment. I was essential. At 7:30 p.m., we moved into the state dining room. The tables were set with china that had been used by presidents for a century. Place cards indicated seating arrangements. I found my seat at table 1, the head table directly across from the president and the French president, beside the Secretary of State and the French ambassador. My family was 2 miles away, sitting in their rented mansion, probably congratulating themselves on excluding the unsophisticated daughter. President Elizabeth Morrison stood to give welcoming remarks. She spoke about the historic friendship between the United States and France, about shared values and common challenges. Then she gestured toward the French president. President Dubois has been particularly interested in conflict prevention strategies. Which is why we're fortunate to have Deputy Director Riley Martin with us tonight, one of the world's leading voices on international crisis management. Every eye turned to me. I stood briefly, acknowledging the recognition, then sat back down as President Dubois spoke. Mademoiselle Martin's work has been transformative, he said in accented English. Her analysis of the Sudan crisis influenced our entire diplomatic approach. France is honored to work with such brilliant minds. Dinner was served. Dover sole, perfectly prepared vegetables, wines that probably cost more than my car. Between courses, I had substantive conversations with people who shaped global policy. The French president asked detailed questions about my recommendations for the Ukraine situation. The Secretary of State wanted my thoughts on the upcoming climate negotiations. At my family's gala, they were probably discussing stock portfolios and vacation homes, impressing each other with superficial markers of success. At 9:15 p.m. my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. I glanced discreetly at my phone. The messages were from my mother's assistant, my brother David, 2 family friends and extended relatives. Is that you at the White House state dinner? CNN is showing footage from the state dinner and you're sitting at the president's table. Your mother is asking if you're really at a state dinner with the French president. Apparently, the state dinner was being covered by news outlets. And apparently, people at my family's gala were watching the coverage and recognizing me. At 9:45 p.m., during a brief break between courses, my phone rang. My mother's number. I declined the call. It rang again. David. Declined. A text from Lauren. Riley, what the hell is going on? People at the gala are saying you're at the White House. Mom is freaking out. I didn't respond. The French ambassador leaned over. Ms. Martin, President Dubois would like to discuss your recommendations for the African Union Summit. Would you have time for a private conversation after dinner? Of course, Ambassador. Dessert was served. A chocolate soufflé that was probably the best thing I'd ever tasted. Coffee came in delicate china cups. The President and President Dubois gave closing remarks thanking everyone for their commitment to international cooperation. As guests began mingling, my phone exploded with calls and texts. My entire family apparently had abandoned their gala to contact me. Secretary Morrison found me again. Riley, before you leave, the President wants you to consider joining the National Security Council's advisory board. It's an informal position, but you'd be consulting on conflict prevention strategies. Interested? Very interested, Madam Secretary. Excellent. My office will reach out next week. She paused. Also, I have to ask. Several people here have mentioned seeing social media posts about some family foundation gala happening tonight. The Martin Family Foundation. That's your family? Yes, ma'am. I noticed you're here instead of there. Professional obligation. Personal choice. She studied me for a moment, then smiled knowingly. Their loss. You're exactly where you belong. At 11 p.m. the State Department driver took me home. My phone had 127 missed calls and 83 text messages. I scrolled through them, my mother hysterical, my father demanding explanations, David angry, Lauren confused, extended family suddenly very interested in my career. One voicemail from my mother. Riley, this is a disaster. Everyone at our gala saw you on television at the White House. They're asking why we never mentioned you work at such high levels. Your father's business contacts want to know why he's never leveraged your connections. People think we deliberately hid you. You've humiliated us. Call me immediately. I deleted it without responding. By Sunday morning, photos from both events had circulated widely. The state dinner was covered by every major news outlet. Photos of me seated at the president's table speaking with world leaders, being acknowledged by both presidents. My family's gala received minimal coverage. A few society blog posts about the venue and menu, nothing substantial. My phone continued ringing. I ignored every call. Monday morning, Secretary Morrison's office sent a formal letter inviting me to join the NSC Advisory Board. The International Crisis Group announced my promotion to Senior Deputy Director with expanded responsibilities. 3 universities requested me for keynote speeches. My family's foundation lost 2 major donors who questioned why the Martin family had never mentioned having a daughter who advised presidents and negotiated peace agreements. The $7,000 monthly deposits into their account? Those stopped immediately. The foundation they'd built while telling people I wasn't sophisticated enough to attend their gala? That began struggling within weeks. My father's consulting business lost clients who wondered why he'd never mentioned his daughter's diplomatic connections. David's bank questioned why he'd failed to leverage family relationships with government officials. Lauren's law firm partners were confused about why she'd never disclosed having a sister who briefed the UN Security Council. 2 weeks later, my mother finally reached me. Riley, we need to talk. This has gotten out of control. We didn't understand the level you were operating at. If you'd known, I would have been worthy of an invitation. The problem isn't that you didn't know, Mom. The problem is you never cared to know. That's not fair. You never told us about your work. You let us think you were just working for some small humanitarian organization. I told you I worked for the International Crisis Group. I mentioned briefing the UN. I talked about conflict zones. You weren't interested because nonprofit work didn't impress you. We're your family. We love you. We made a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to exclude me because I didn't fit your image of success. You told people I was traveling for work rather than admit you didn't think I was sophisticated enough for your event. We can fix this. The foundation could really benefit from your connections. Think of the doors you could open for us. The doors are closed, Mom. You don't get to exclude me when I'm an embarrassment and include me when I'm useful. I hung up. The Martin Family Foundation struggled for 6 more months before dissolving. Without my financial support and with their reputation damaged by publicly excluding their most accomplished family member, they couldn't maintain the facade of philanthropic importance. My career flourished. I traveled to conflict zones, advised governments, wrote a 3rd book that became an international bestseller. President Morrison consulted me on every major foreign policy decision. The French president invited me to Paris to address the National Assembly. My family learned that sophistication isn't measured by designer clothes or Michelin-starred dinners. It's measured by the impact you have, the problems you solve, the lives you change through work that actually matters. They'd said I wasn't ready for sophisticated company, that I didn't operate at high levels. They were right. I didn't operate at their levels. I operated far above them.